Our next storyteller is Tracy Nguyen. Her story is called The Healing Journey Home. Tracy was born and raised here in San Jose, so she's our only second generation immigrant. She grew up with refugee parents from Vietnam, and it largely defines who she is even today. And she's also a driven community organizer with a creative entrepreneurial spirit. And she received a BA in Media Studies and Ethnic Studies from UC Berkeley. Over the past 10 years in the East Bay, Tracy worked in the nonprofit sector to uplift the voices and power of refugees and immigrants, women, youth, LGBTQ community, and incarcerated individuals. Now she's a freelancer in videography, and she's also a graphic facilitator, where you come to meetings and you graph out what everybody's saying. It's amazing to watch her when we would have meetings and she's graphing the whole meeting. These days she's back at home in San Jose with her parents, and as you will hear, she's now trying to integrate all her worlds and all her evolving, curious, high-energy identities. So come on up and share your story.
Hi, everyone. The bio, that's my story, that's it. I'm just gonna say the same thing. Okay. I'm Tracy, I'm a daughter of refugees. And I was born here in San Jose in 1989. So although I didn't go through what my parents did, it certainly shaped the 30 years of life that I've lived so far. And actually, I spent my whole life investigating, how did my family come here? Why America, right? So in third grade, we were to write a speech about our parents' journey to America, and that's when I found out, oh, my mom's a boat person. In seventh grade, in AP World History class, we were to talk about a genocide, so I presented about how Vietnam should be considered a genocide because my dad survived 7 years of re-education camp where he witnessed people getting massacred and murdered. And then in college, I made a 20-minute documentary about the American portrayal of the Vietnam War, and that's when I realized what a contradiction war is. So while I was growing up with all that curiosity, my parents were trying to make ends meet, business after business. So we started off with a nail salon shop, as typical Vietnamese refugees do. And then when that didn't work out, we opened a banh mi shop in Long Beach. And then when that didn't work out, we opened a computer repair shop. And then we sold water for 99 cents a gallon. And then finally in 1999, we opened up a laundromat in Saratoga. So the laundromat was like a really big hustle. They would wake up at 5 a.m., load the car with inventory, drive to work, and do people's dirty laundry for $1 a pound. They would wash, dry, and fold people's dirty laundry. And my parents' hands were cracked from all the dry heat, and every hour they had to sweep the floor of the dust, the lint, and the dryer sheets that was floating around. And I witnessed this all because on the weekends I would join them in folding the clothes. And on hot days, we would string the clothes to dry instead of putting in the dryer so we would save money on quarters. And then college. So my parents didn't have the language skills or education to help me through, to help me growing up. And so I just copied what all the other kids were doing. I did the sports, the band, the clubs, the AP classes, the SATs, and somehow I ended up in Berkeley. Yeah. And going to college really transformed how I understood my family's life and why we were in America. I was exposed to student activism. I learned about Asian American immigrants in my Asian American Studies class. I learned about the civil rights history and the LGBT movement, the feminist movement, and then I learned about the anti-war movement in the 60s, right? So in the 60s, the folks who were fighting against the war, I would talk to my mom about it, and she says, "Gong, don't you know those Berkeley protesters were the ones that made us lose the war? Those Berkeley protesters are the ones that made us lose our country." So I was like, wait a minute. Here I am in college, empowered and like challenging the U.S. system, and America sucks. And my parents, my dad, my uncle, who served in the military in the Vietnam War, they see America as a savior. So I was wondering, could it be that my parents were on the wrong side of the war? That was confusing to me. And speaking of confusing, I entered my first same-sex relationship my second year of college, and that began my queer journey. I joined LGBT groups, I volunteered, I worked for an LGBT organization, and I also fought for marriage equality. And so with the differing politics and my closeted sexuality, it was harder and harder for me to come back to San Jose. It's only an hour drive, but it was harder for me to come back home. I had 3 jobs in college, and I would send money back home, but it didn't feel like I could be my authentic self back at home with my family. So after I graduated, I stayed up in the East Bay for 8 more years. I built my community activist work in Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco. And through all the community work, I still wasn't finding the answers I was looking for about why were my parents here? Why did that have to happen? And I got really tired from working with all the communities facing trauma over and over and over. And then by the end of 2016, I became a free agent and just worked for myself. I opened up a videography company called Sunkiss Productions. And then I went to Vietnam for 2 months. And I went on this secret political exposure trip. What is that, you ask? Well, I met with the party of Vietnam, the Socialist Party. I met with war veterans from the war who were fighting my dad. So I met these elders and I said, why did you fight the war? And what I learned in Vietnam was that I grew up with a narrative that we lost the war, right? We grew up with this trauma of 2 million people left Vietnam to America. And then in Vietnam, people my age were celebrating the war. They believed and they celebrated that they won a war against the biggest power in the world, the US. So again, like the contradictions, like flipped my world, and Vietnam gave me more questions I didn't know I wanted to ask. And so I couldn't wait to come home to tell my dad about this. So fast forward, February 2017, I finally come back to America, and my dad's in the hospital. I was wondering why my dad wasn't responding to my text messages I sent him during Lunar New Year. And he was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and nobody told me while I was in Vietnam. Everyone kept it from me because they didn't want me to come home early, or they didn't want to ruin my trip. But he survived a stroke, and then half of his body became paralyzed, and now he has dementia. So that was a big calling for me to come back home, whether or not I felt ready to come back to San Jose. So fast forward again, here I am. I've been home for 8 months in this lovely town, lovely city, and a lot has changed. We sold our laundromat. My mom and dad retired because my dad couldn't work anymore, so my mom became his caretaker. I don't hear war stories at the dinner table anymore because my dad has dementia and he doesn't remember what he ate for breakfast. And my partner comes over and joins all our family engagements. So the relationship with my dad, I never got to debrief with him what it was like to meet his enemy, his own Vietnamese people. I grew up with his trauma, right? His abuse, his addiction, his gambling, his depression. And what I learned in Vietnam by meeting all these people, I thought I could have a conversation with him to help heal the trauma that's created in war, right? But instead I came home and he was sick and he no longer remembered who he was. So I still hold a lot of what ifs, like what would that conversation be like? How do we heal now that he can't remember, he can't talk to me? And as for my mom, I came out to her in a coming out letter in Vietnamese language in my early 20s, and she thought it was a phase. But there's this group I'm a part of called Kitty Viet Cafe, and we host radical Lunar New Year festivals. So imagine on stage you have LGBTQ poets, artists, dancers, musicians, films, and in the audience you have Vietnamese elders, parents, allies, youth, right? And so it's a really amazing experience. And so finally, because my mom retired, she came to one of the shows, and afterwards I asked, Mom, how was that for you to witness an LGBT Vietnamese community? And she told me, I'm so happy that you have a community that you feel joyful with, and I'm so proud that all of you care about your roots and where you're from. And then right after that, she called all my aunties in SoCal and raved about how I threw this great LGBT Lunar New Year party. I was like, wow, my mom came out for me to my extended family. Yeah, my cousin's like, did you know your mom's telling everyone you're gay? I'm like, oh shit. Okay. So it's really come full circle for me, right? I spent my whole childhood being curious and confused as to why my family was different. And then in college, it was about finding myself and following my dreams and reconciling this relationship with my family and their trauma. And then I thought by the time I became 30, everything would be clear, I'd be good. I'm 30, I literally have no answers to any of the questions. But what I do know is that I'm always going to be curious, and I'm always going to have more questions. So maybe life isn't about struggling to answer the questions. Maybe life should be about enjoying the process of being curious. And a little gift for you. This is my third grade speech that I wrote. I'm a hoarder, I don't throw things away. And it was in the perspective of your mom. So the last part was in the voice of my mom. We moved to California, and now we are U.S. citizens. We try to work hard for our children's future. We're happy to live here because we have everything we need and freedom.